G'day, my name's Alex Thomas and I'm an eternal empath, a recovering perfectionist and a die-hard advocate for the health, safety and well-being of those in rural industries and communities. I'm also a self-employed consultant, a part-time carer for my disabled dad and the founder of the Plant a Seed for Safety project, an Australian initiative that seeks to celebrate rural women and to improve the health, safety and well-being of those in rural industries and communities. Originally from a sheep station in the South Australian outback, not that far from here and not dissimilar to where we are today, my career in work health and safety started some 14 years ago, catalysed by an early career in mining, the deterioration of my dad's health and my love for life on the land. As a safety professional, it wasn't until I'd spent some time working in the fishing industry that I became acutely aware of just how deeply entrenched some of my own biases were on what good work health and safety might look like in the context of rural industries. And it's some of those learnings that I'm really looking forward to sharing with you today. Importantly, I know from personal experience that there is nothing more fulfilling than life on the land, and that equally, as small family businesses, there's virtually no line between what's considered work and what's considered home. I also know that despite our industry's fatality statistics, that in many ways we are more personally accountable for the health and safety of our people, our family and friends, than the majority of CEOs from larger organisations. Our people are not numbers, and yet phrases like, "It'll never happen to me," "I've always done it this way," "Do as I say, not as I do," "It'll cost too much," and "I just don't have the time," are some of the most dangerous and common expressions inside the English language. We know we need a different approach, and we also know that our livelihoods and those of our future generations depend on it. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for the opportunity to share some words with you about my pursuit to improve the lives of those in rural industries and communities in Australia, New Zealand, Wales and the world. Enjoy.
When the fire burns out here, it's brighter than the city lights, warmer than a heart of gold. And dingoes howl just to break the silence. The sun comes up just to break the cold. Last night I woke with the stars looking back at me, swallowing the sky. I felt no anger, I felt no shame, I felt no reason to cry.
Dad was 33 when he caught Q fever from his work with feral goats. He was then diagnosed with Ross River virus and later diabetes, and I vividly remember the difficulty in understanding that Dad wasn't allowed to eat sugar anymore.
I learned to live in a new town, but my heart is staying here.
The drought of 82, the drought of the 90s, absurd interest rates and abysmal wool prices had a profound impact on my family and my livelihood. And I'll never forget the heartache of coming home from boarding school at 13 years of age, only to learn that the station was to be sold, and then at 15 to hear of my parents' divorce. The collective impact of Q fever, Ross River, diabetes, drought and divorce meant that Dad was later diagnosed with kidney failure, heart failure and multiple amputations. And after 23 years of unrelenting illness, he was deemed permanently disabled at the age of 56. I've been caring for Dad in different capacities since I was around 15 years old, and it's now my life's work to help prevent people from getting hurt in rural industries. Work health, safety and wellbeing should never be about policies, paperwork or penalties, but about practical, meaningful solutions and safer, healthier choices that will actually save a life. 40 years ago, nobody wore seatbelts, and today we do it without even thinking about it. As my legacy to my mum, my dad, our industry and our way of life, plant a seed for safety, and for God's sake, save a life. Listen to your wife.
But I can see as clear as day. If I'm not here in the morning, yeah, I'll cry a river of tears.
Dad was rendered permanently disabled at the age of 56, and as the eldest sibling and the next woman in line after my mum left, I felt the weight of the responsibility for his health since I was around 15 years old. And based on chats I've had with others around my age, I know I'm not the only young person to have done so. Because 8 times more people are hurt in Australian rural industries than in any other industry nationwide. And a staggering 93% of them are men. When my dad passes away, he's not going to be accounted for in these statistics because probably like lots of the blokes you know, he'd rather stick a pen in his eye than talk about his suffering because he's tough as nails and because he wouldn't want people to fuss. The problem here is even bigger than we think it is. But what if he was compliant? Would that change where he is today? Ladies and gentlemen, compliance is a dirty word. In Australia and in New Zealand, to be compliant with work health and safety legislation is more often than not assimilated with paperwork, penalties, policies and procedures. We think it's costly, complicated and time-consuming, and yet we forget that the intent of compliance is simply just don't kill someone. Now, I was incredibly fortunate to have been a co-investigator on a research project with a doctor of sociology that allowed me to explore what's actually been done over the years on an international scale to try and prevent people from getting hurt in rural industries. And what we found, which will probably come as no surprise, is that most of what's been done has come in the form of training, seminars and fact sheets about safety equipment. Which leads me to my next point, which is that this approach, whilst incredibly well intended, has done 2/5 of 5 parts of absolutely bugger all in actually reducing the number of people hurt. Something obviously isn't working, and yet we've been down this road before. Because you know what? 40 years ago, nobody wore seatbelts. Drink driving was as common as a farmer whinging about the weather, and smoking was still an accessory. So, what's changed? It's now socially unacceptable to partake in these things. Our individual belief systems on what is okay versus what is not okay have changed. And let me give you the hot tip. It's not because we read a fact sheet, and it's not because we sat in a classroom for an hour. It's not because we followed a procedure, nor is it because we might get a slap across the wrist from the local copper. We have been influenced by those around us to make smarter, safer and healthier choices. Now, I've spent a lifetime watching, revering and learning from rural men and women. And despite the common notion that some of us have been doing it this way for years, to the contrary, we are brilliant problem solvers. We're self-professed mechanical, civil, structural and environmental engineers, and most of the time, there ain't no problem too big or too small that can't be solved, at least with some baling twine and duct tape. On a broader scale, we've successfully navigated complex challenges like drought, floods, market access, biosecurity, transport and natural resource management. Our community spirit is second to none and has seen us survive more adversity than most of our metropolitan neighbours. We are some of the most adaptive, resourceful and conscientious people this globe has to offer, and we are already perfectly equipped to reduce the number of people being hurt in rural industries. Because, and here's something your average safety professional won't tell you, is that most of the time, things go right. Most of the time, people don't lose arms in augers. Most of the time, a farmhand can handle hazardous chemicals without wearing the right personal protective equipment and without splashing it on their face. A farmer can weld without getting welding flash, and a backpacker can operate a tractor without running someone over. However, this is not to say that there isn't room for improvement, because after all, Australian rural industries are losing 8 times more people than any other industry nationwide, and 93% of them are men. And based on what I'm told, New Zealand statistics aren't dissimilar, and Wales are in the same boat as well. What it does mean is that the proof is already in the pudding. It's in turning up the volume on what's already being done well, in harnessing our innate engineer and our relentless desire to improve and to survive that is our capacity to lead change. For example, guards around augers. Machines are kept in good condition. Clear expectations on how to manage fatigue and conversations about mental health. It's not really rocket science, now is it? Now, I don't profess to have any kind of silver bullet for how to inspire 60-something-year-old Mick, who has been doing it this way for years, to become some kind of safety activist. But what I do know is this. If in real life Roger Lloyd Pack was a farmer, and he decided to buy a brand new state-of-the-art ute that's bigger and better than everybody else's in the district, then there's a damn good chance his old mate Trevor, also a farmer, would be perving on it from over the fence and would start thinking, or at least dreaming, of doing the same. If we, and yep, that's all of us here today, actively support and encourage each other and the broader industry to spend less time trying to tear apart why something went wrong, did somebody mention quad bikes, and much, much more on communicating when things go right, then perhaps rural industries on an international scale will embrace the notion that not only is work health and safety about responding to an incident, but about preventing them. Which means we need to focus much, much more on fixing the stuff that could actually seriously hurt someone. Did someone say fatigue? On being deliberate about the choices that we make on a day-to-day basis and how they might be influencing other people. Do as I say, not as I do. I bet you've never heard that one before. And on making my favourite term, common sense, not just assumed, but explicit. It's about setting clear expectations on what is okay versus what is not okay, and in turn, preventing people from getting hurt and having sustainable businesses that people will want to continue to work with. If we raise the confidence of rural women to speak up about health and safety and to have conversations about the risks on the farm that could actually take a life, then perhaps we could enhance our industry's diversity of thought on what we could be doing better and safer, and what it really means to use a quad bike safely in the context of our businesses, and therefore how to respond to the broader community with a positive story on what good work health and safety looks like to us and on what we're doing to perpetuate that. And as a rural woman myself who has had the misfortune of watching my dad's health decline to the contrary of my sister's, my mother's and my grandmother's advice, heed the following. She knows you, your workers, your children and your business better than anybody else does. She's an expert and you literally cannot buy that intel off the shelf. She might have some physical limitations in the paddock, but they work to her benefit because she's careful and she's risk averse. She cares about your whereabouts, about what could go wrong, and about how that might affect the family and the business. She's a succession planner and she's a decision maker. She listens to you groan about your work-related ailments, about whatever broke down that day, the improvements the neighbour made, and how Trevor shouldn't be reaping in the heat, or in Wales, how Dylan shouldn't be spreading slurry in the rain. She's connected with the other women in the district and she listens. She's informed. And at the end of the day, she knows how to plant a seed in the paddock and in the minds of your people, and she knows how to nurture change, even if it means taking things into her own hands. And finally, if I tell you here today that those of us in rural industry should be less fixated on the perpetual myth that investing in health and safety is only going to cost you money, but on taking practical, meaningful steps and having conversations that actively reduce the work health and safety risk in your businesses, and you go to the bar tonight and you spin a yarn to 60-something-year-old Mick, while he might not do anything differently, then again, maybe he will. Ladies and gentlemen, the key message here is this. You are the experts. You know your work and the incumbent risks better than anybody else does. You also know what flicks your workmates switch, what makes him or her want to change the way they do something, and when. And most importantly, you know when it is that you feel wary about doing certain tasks because they're dangerous. And if you don't, because perhaps you're male and because, hey, it'll never happen to me, then I suggest you have a conversation with one of the women in the business, and I'm pretty sure she'll happily give you the lowdown on what she thinks the risks are and what to do about them. The fact that each and every one of you here today represents multiple generations of brains trust for the work that you do, and you're the custodians of not only your own, but your workmates, or better still, your children's livelihoods, means that you are the only people that are equipped to be making smart, practical and meaningful decisions on how to improve work health and safety. So just to emphasise the point around practicality, we don't want to talk about high-vis vests anymore because they're actually not that great at saving people's lives. We also don't want to talk about policies, procedures and paperwork because again, that stuff isn't necessarily going to stop someone from making the choice to step over an exposed PTO shaft. We're not keen on spending thousands on consultants for, you guessed it, more paperwork, and be buggered if we're going to spend any more time on Google trying to work out exactly what we're supposed to do to become compliant. But do you know what does save lives? You do. Men and women who are prepared to plant a seed for safety. To have an ongoing conversation with your partner, your workmates, your boss, the contractor, your friends, your children and the neighbour about what the risks are in the workplace, about what's working well and about how that can be amplified. Yep, it's a fact. Improving health and safety has absolutely nothing to do with waiting for the next incident to happen and then thinking about changing the way you do something. It's about taking practical, meaningful action now. Vaccinations against Q fever. Fix the brakes in the loader. Get laser focused on how you manage stress in the workplace and set a new benchmark with your family and with your staff. Create a comfortable environment for workers, and that includes contractors and family members, to speak up when something's not right, or to make suggestions whether it could be done better or safer. And make it abundantly clear that if you or your workers simply must climb on top of a truck chassis, how you would have justified having managed the risk of falling, particularly to someone who doesn't know what it means to have common sense. It's in having a blanket standard for the use of personal protective equipment when handling hazardous chemicals, and not telling your son not to handle them without wearing it and then going and doing it yourself while he's watching. It's about setting clear expectations on what is okay and what is not okay and verbalising it. It's about talking the talk and walking the walk. Don't do maintenance on live equipment without switching the isolator on. No fiddling with electrical wiring without a qualification, and no going out on your own and not taking your mobile phone with you. And guess what? And this could save you some serious heartache. Paperwork doesn't save lives. despite the fact that there is not one line in the 601 pages of Australian work health and safety legislation that says you are legally obliged to have a documented policy or procedure. There is a dangerous misconception in both Australia and New Zealand to suggest that work health and safety is less about preventing people from getting hurt and more about having the paperwork to cover your butt. And based on a 2018 report produced by the Health and Safety Executive titled Understanding Business to Business Burden, it sounds like this could become a very real challenge for farmers in the United Kingdom. So as a reminder to anyone, anywhere, who is invested in improving health, safety and wellbeing on farm, keep it practical. Paperwork, high-vis vests, gloves and signage are merely a last line of defence, and any competent inspector, auditor or consultant will tell you that the best evidence of compliance is when a person can competently show you and tell you how to do the job safely. And better still, when no one gets hurt in the first place. Research suggests that upwards of 90% of incidents come back to a choice or a decision made by a person. So the opportunity for any business in rural industries is to learn from the mistakes of other industries, forget about the paperwork, and in doing so, to circumnavigate the process of fostering positive culture change, to focus much, much more on having good conversations about safety and take practical, meaningful action on the things that could actually save a life. So if we really are serious about supporting and encouraging each other to do so, then from our perspective, then what do we actually need to do? Well, I'm really glad you asked. Firstly, challenge yourself to think differently about work health and safety. In the words of the highly acclaimed Dutch safety god, Professor Sidney Dekker, health and safety isn't a bureaucratic activity, it's an ethical one. The mentality that work health and safety is all about policies, penalties and paperwork, or that it's costly, complicated and time-consuming is not only uninspiring, it's dangerous. Anchor yourself to a culture of care for not only those around you, but for yourself. Your partner, your children and your industry need you. And if not for yourself, then do it for them. Secondly, 40 years ago, nobody wore seatbelts, and today we do it without even thinking about it, which means we need to talk to our partners, our workmates, our boss, our contractor, our friends, our children and our neighbours about what could go wrong, about how it could go wrong, and about what we're going to do to prevent that from happening. Literally. Around the back of the ute, at the kitchen table, on the way out to a job, just talk about it. Ask questions, plant a seed for safety, and in turn, turn up the volume on what's working well. Start a conversation that will eventually make it universally not cool to be unsafe or to take shortcuts. And finally, just do something. Like all legislation, it's there to manage criminal negligence. That is, people who are consciously and deliberately not doing anything to manage the risk and therefore are putting themselves and other people at risk. You can only do the best in the context of your business, and it's up to each and every one of you, no matter what role you're in, to decide what that looks like and how you're going to address it. So since there's no way a procedure, a fact sheet or classroom-based training would have influenced my dad to make smarter, safer and healthier choices about managing his exposure to Q fever, his decisions to work himself into the ground, or his tough as nails mentality. As my legacy to my mum, my dad, our industry and our way of life, plant a seed for safety and for God's sake, save a life, listen to your wife.